All right, pretty exciting news for you today. Finally got our first major post-release update for Dune Awakening. Recently, Funcom outlined some of their upcoming plans for new updates and content for the game. You know, if you didn't catch the memo, I was properly obsessed with this title when it launched and really have just been eagerly awaiting another good enough reason to jump back in, to return to the sands of Arrakis. And it looks like I may just have exactly that reason sometime soon, question mark? Maybe, we'll see. There's stuff coming soon. We'll see if it's good enough to get me back in. All right, okay, so just the other day, we got a developer update titled Roadmap and Future Plans. This opened with them briefly recapping the past few months, like what have they been up to. We've been playing whack-a-mole with bugs, cheats, and exploits during the July month of summer. We've banned thousands of cheaters, fixed a bunch of duplication and exploit bugs, and continued working on the stability of the game. We've been working to achieve a cadence of patches that allows us time to make stable and consistent fixes while being fast enough to address issues like exploits before they get too far out of control. They then followed that and moved into the good stuff in saying, this week at Gamescom, we are going to be talking about the Chapter 2 free update and the Lost Harvest DLC, our first major additions to the game, which will be releasing in parallel, and they will be releasing next month in September. We're getting this stuff very, very soon. Now, along with this, they had a roadmap, and this showcased the bullet point highlights of content coming over the course of the next year. At the top is that aforementioned workflow for monthly patches that they've got going, mostly aimed at implementing fixes and improvements for any major issues, along with squashing bugs and rooting out cheaters. Then, the game's first big update, which, as I mentioned, is scheduled for next month in September. With this, we are going to be getting the next chapter, which is free for everybody, along with the first DLC, which is paid. However, it's worth noting that if you purchased the deluxe or the ultimate edition of Dune Awakening, that included a season pass, which grants access to the first 4 DLCs. So this is DLC number 1, and then there are 3 remaining if you bought a deluxe or ultimate edition. Otherwise, if you bought the base version of Dune Awakening, the DLC portion of what we're about to cover would be a paid edition. But there's a lot of stuff just in the free thing as well. So Chapter 2, all the free stuff. This is going to include a main story continuation, so a whole new main story quest line. There will be character recustomization if you happen to not be happy with the look of your current characters. Dynamic encounters, which really piques my interest. I'm super curious to get details on exactly what that entails. To my ear, dynamic encounters sounds like exactly what I was hoping that the game had. The game just was really static. Like, yes, you had the worm, and yes, you had the Sardaukar patrols, but outside of that, everything in the game was pretty much rooted in distinct locations, and you never really saw much change to it. Dynamic encounters, dynamic events within that world of Haga Basin and or the Deep Desert, that alone could breathe a lot more life into the game. So again, keeping my fingers crossed that that's kind of what I think it might be. There's going to be new social hub contracts. Those are, of course, the quests that you pick up in major cities. There will be new Deep Desert layouts. This is pretty self-explanatory, as well as new archetype armors. And I assume that this means we're going to be getting armors that tailor to different play styles and roles beyond the ones that we currently have. So you know how like the different armor types have different stat perks for like stamina and different mitigations, stamina reduction or making stamina less efficient, right? New archetype armor sounds like they're getting like new playstyle themed armors for different builds and whatever. That could be really, really nice. There's also going to be some new hairstyles and tattoos in addition to some undisclosed additions that will be included in that Chapter 2. So that's all the free stuff that's coming no matter the version of Dune Awakening that you purchased. Now on to the Lost Harvest DLC, which again will be paid or it's included if you bought the deluxe or the ultimate edition. So this will come with a brand new vehicle. Now the current assumption is that this will be the tank that we saw a whole bunch of in pre-launch trailers that didn't make its way into the launch version of the game. There will also be a brand new contract chain with unique locations. There's currently a handful of quests that have you like loading into special instance zones from the overworld map, kind of assuming that whatever this new contract chain with quote unique locations is going to be something like that. And there will be some new building pieces and decorations, new armor and weapon skins. That's of course entirely cosmetic, as well as new swatches and emotes and some more stuff in addition to that. So when it comes to the paid DLC, the stuff that like isn't just sort of cosmetic or vanity things include a brand new vehicle, that new contract chain, and that's actually it. Everything else, yeah, is like cosmetic stuff. So if you bought the base version of Dune Awakening and you don't feel like paying for this DLC, you will be missing out on a contract chain, which probably isn't a big deal, but missing out on the new vehicle, that actually kind of sucks. Like I'm kind of surprised they didn't roll that into the chapter update instead of it being in the DLC update. So I'm sure that's going to be a point of complaint for people in the future once this stuff rolls out, which I get it. I feel like anything content based, unless it's like a full on expansion, at least for this first year, I don't know. I'm just kind of surprised that they are locking the new vehicle behind the paid DLC and not including it in the free stuff. That's all I'm saying. But anyways, now when looking at this list of stuff, one thing might stand out to you if you're paying attention, and that is nothing really pertaining to Endgame here, and they address as much in the blog post by saying, some of you will note that while Chapter 2 and the DLC add new content and cosmetics to the game, they are not focused on the endgame. This is because Chapter 2 and the DLC were planned and began development prior to launch. However, in their subsequent planned updates, they will be having an endgame focus. In fact, sometime between January and March of 2026, we'll be getting the next major update, which includes Chapter 3 with a revamped endgame, and the Raiders of the Broken Lands DLC, which will be adding a whole bunch of new unique cosmetics. And then between April and June of next year, Chapter 4, no details revealed on what that's going to be exactly, but this is when we get the Water Wars DLC, which adds the polar caps of Arrakis. This looks to be the real huge new content update in the game, as it will be adding the entirely new map of the polar caps, which is likely to be similar to Haga Basin, but obviously like snow and ice themed from everything that we've heard. So that is the big one. That's the one that like I might revisit prior to that, but a lot of the people who are like less invested in the game probably are going to wait until the Water Wars DLC comes out between April and June of next year. And then from July to the end of 2026, they are planning to include an expansion, the release of the console version of the game, more free chapter updates, and of course, more DLCs. And again, all of this is in the roadmap that they posted with this article. Now, at the moment, we do only have these bullet points from the roadmap, but they did promise we'll be getting some more details and specifics on the major content and features that are coming sometime soon. In the meantime, though, they have laid out some of their planned quality of life improvements. So they're going to be adding the ability to rename vehicles, storage containers, and other placeables. This is really nice if you want to have a chest that's just for currency, one that's for certain resources. You can now quickly see at a glance what goes where. They're going to also have more reliable ornithopter rockets for any combat enthusiast, and the highly requested option to swap seats in a vehicle with a hotkey. Thank you so much. This is going to make solo mining from a buggy like 1,000 times better. I think one of the first things post-launch that I complained about was like, why can't I use a hotkey to swap seats while I'm solo mining? So glad they're finally planning to add that into the game. All of these features are going to be available for testing on the public test client soon, according to this post. Then after this, they dove into the discussion of Endgame, what they've done so far, and what they have planned for the future. During summer, we've made changes and tweaks to the formula of the deep desert with varying degrees of success. We have attracted very different demographics to the game, and they are asking for very different things. They then go on to say that we've identified several core issues. Those include loss of items/vehicles, players feeling like they are forced into PvP, exploits and cheats, and finally, the lack of endgame content or grind. Now, on a personal note, for each of these core issues that they've identified, here are my thoughts. Well, I don't really mind the loss of items and vehicles so much. Like, I get the appeal of having that more hardcore spin on PvP in a game like this, and I find it appealing myself, so long as it feels like you have a fair shot and aren't just losing stuff without any chance of recourse, which could be the case when, say, 20 ornithopters appear just 100 meters away from you and you don't actually have an opportunity to escape before the rockets blast you out of the sky, which was an issue. Or maybe you have some speed hacking carrier that grabs and carries you away to your doom. Don't love that either, but if that stuff can be addressed, like, I like a fair feeling game that has the stakes of losing gear and or vehicles. I'm fine with that. As for feeling forced into PvP, I gotta be honest, I never really felt that way. Most of my enjoyment of this game at release did come through Haga Basin. Like, all of the gear that I was able to farm in the Duraluminum tier was way more than enough to clear all of the game's content with ease. Now, it is a shame that the Deep Desert was a bit of a mess at release. Like, I would have loved to experience more of it, but even what I did experience of it, I didn't exactly love, and ideally, of course, some of their already made, along with their upcoming plans, will help change that, and maybe I enjoy the Deep Desert more in the future. Patching out exploits and banning cheaters, that's obvious, bit of a no-brainer. Yes, of course, do that. And as for the lack of endgame content and grind, yeah, I agree, that was a sticking point for me as well. Like, I loved playing the game, got many hundreds of hours out of it and really enjoyed it, but I did feel like I ran out of things to do at the point where I still would have enjoyed continuing to play more had there been repeatable content for power progression and or some additional PvE challenges that helped push our character builds and gear. Again, I was running around in just full duraluminum, and I could solo clear the hardest testing stations with my melee and shield build out in the deep desert. Like, I know they had those group focused testing stations, but I was solo clearing it like a week after launch. I didn't need anybody there, and my server was dead enough that I could be in the testing station solo, clearing this hard content and not run into other players either. So it is, but yeah, they definitely could have used for the PvE crowd some more endgame content. So that's a no-brainer, and that is something that they're planning on doing. So let's move into that. What they are thinking, well, we've got both short and long-term plans in order to address some of the above issues. In the short term, they're going to be making changes that have been heavily requested by the community. This includes improved player logging, or in other words, there will be a list of what happened to any items, objects, or vehicles that you lose. They will be increasing the amount of detailed information in player logs, which will give you a clear picture of why something that we had before is now gone. So for example, if players destroy your ornithopter, or if somebody takes items from your storage chest, you're gonna see exactly who did or who took what and when. It's gonna be a clear picture of, I had this stuff, it's not here anymore, where did it go? That's going to be detailed in your player logs. No more guessing. There's going to be a vehicle salvaging system. This will provide a means of recovering any lost or destroyed vehicles instead of having to then rebuild new ones from scratch. Cobalt paste and vehicle inventory. They will be adjusting the volume of cobalt paste as it's currently very heavy, which is going to in turn let you carry more. On top of that, they will be adding more slots to the assault ornithopter's vehicle inventory, along with a cargo container for the carrier ornithopter, which just means more storage all around. Also, the change to cobalt paste, that has already gone live. They just released a patch that cut its volume in half from 1 down to 0.5. Testing stations in the deep desert are now going to have instance loot that is instant to players, whereas before it was first come first serve. If you went to a desert testing station and there was a lootable chest, if you looted it, it was no longer lootable for anyone else on your server, and then the loot went on a long respawn timer or long cooldown. Now, every time you reach any lootable chest in the deep desert, it will always be available for you, just like how it works in Haga Basin. And then when you pull loot from it, it goes on a personal respawn timer, which, if I recall correctly, something like 45 minutes or so. I think that's the duration. So you would go somewhere at a point of interest or a testing station, you would loot a chest, you came back 45 minutes later, you could loot that chest again, where in the deep desert, they made it so that the first person to get there while there was loot would take it, and then no one else could loot it until the respawn timer completed, and then it was populated again, and once more, the first person to get to it gets all the loot. So that is changing. Now the chests in the deep desert are going to work just like they do in the Haga Basin. Maybe there will be a different respawn timer duration, I don't know, but that's functionally they're going to work the same. Also, some offline notifications for important events. So what they're going to be doing is creating a notification service that sends you the status of your base via email. That's right. So they're going to be warning you if your taxes are due or if your power is about to run out. Sounds like public service companies. It's just hilarious to me. I get that it's useful for people who want to maintain this stuff without logging in and checking it manually. Personally though, like if I'm to the point in a game where I am only logging in to pay my taxes or fuel the generators, I'm really not invested enough to care if the stuff goes away anyway, and most likely would have intended to do a fresh start once I started playing again, which is the case for Dune Awakening. Like, all my stuff is long gone, don't care, I plan to start from scratch anyways. But I 1,000% understand people's desire to keep the hard-earned resources, the bases that they've built, all of their vehicles and loot, I get that people want to keep more than just what you can keep in the social hub storage in those cities, right? I understand. People love to keep their stuff, especially if you sunk a lot of time in it, right? So I get it. So if that helps with that, it's awesome. I think it's funny to me, the idea of like Funcom sending you an email that you have to pay your in-game taxes. It's kind of funny, right? Like it serves a purpose, but it's also kind of funny. Also, in the short term, they do have a whole slate of additional UI and UX improvements, some continued crackdowns on exploiters and cheaters, along with stability improvements. Now on to, I think, what is the really good stuff, the long-term plans. Here's what they've got in mind for the end game further down the road. So obviously, we do know that we're going to be getting new areas to explore. As mentioned, the first new big map that we're going to be getting is scheduled for around April of next year, when they are adding the Polar Caps region. And once more, like how Haga Basin and the Deep Desert are their own separate maps that you fly and load into, the Polar Caps that are coming with the Water Wars DLC, that is going to be a third major new open world region to the game. That's the big new content that's coming in the pipeline. But in addition to that, they also want us to have endgame content that keeps us playing. And they've got some long-term goals and things for us to grind, which will include an overhaul to the Landsrod. So at release, it was actually their intention for the Landsrod to be an endgame activity driver, and it's pretty clear for most players it didn't cut it. In fact, they themselves say, currently it does not have the breadth or depth of content or progression to serve that function. As we work towards Chapter 3, we will begin to tie the faction progression of the game to the Landsrod, while also systemically building out the Landsrod with a greater variety of activities across the world, which is something that I am genuinely really excited to see what they do here. And they have some things that they're planning. So what this is going to mean for us, the players, is that we're going to be able to increase our faction rank by completing Landsrod tasks. We'll be able to check in with the Duke and or Baron occasionally to perform special missions and visit faction vendors. But the Landsrod activities themselves are going to change from being delivery based, where you're like bring a collection of items and turn it in, to now being contract based, where you pick up a contract and then you go out and complete whatever the objective is. They said this is going to allow them to effectively remove the issue of stockpiling that's currently taking place, and it's the case on most servers. Players and guilds have these massive resource stockpiles, these pools, and they use them to instantly complete Landsrod activities as soon as they're available. They also say for any solo players out there, and I know there's a lot of you out there like me who enjoy mostly playing solo, this change is going to give us more choices in terms of how we progress over time. Now, in terms of the new planned activities, they have a lot of additional things beyond testing stations and shipwrecks, and they gave some examples of what this might include: assassinations, treasure maps, races, construction challenges, duels, faction versus faction maps, improved control points, scavenger hunts, and temporary crafting challenges. Now, they did say that this isn't a set in stone list of promised activities. It's just currently what they're working on and playing around with. So depending on how development goes, some of these will make the cut, but others likely won't. The goal, though, is that for all of these new activities as being ways of making use of the existing overland map, spawning in new maps, i.e. areas where it's required, but otherwise making use of the existing space, because the plan has always been to flesh out the overland map over time, which I think makes a lot of sense, given the amount of space they have between the existing locations of Haga Basin, the Deep Desert, and the two faction capital cities. And honestly, all of those activities sound great. I think I'm particularly interested in things like Assassination Quest, where they give you a target and you go out and eliminate it, or treasure maps, where say they give you a painting of an area and you got to figure out the location and find the treasure based on that. And faction versus faction maps sound phenomenal, could be a lot of fun, barring the obvious issue of server faction imbalance that exists. So we'll see how they address that problem. Now, also, for enjoyers of the Deep Desert, you will be happy to hear that the plan is, as the Landsrod activities get more fleshed out, they're going to transition the Deep Desert back towards its original intention of being a sandbox area where players can compete for the control of spice, which is predominantly PvP focused. They will also continue to iterate on the Deep Desert, adding no-fly zones to enforce ground combat in certain areas. I love that, because I feel like, you know, we spend the first 100 hours building up our character, getting our skills, doing all these things, and then the endgame PvP, at least at launch when I played, it was all Ornithopter battles, and we weren't using our gear, we weren't really using our weapon, we weren't using the skills and builds that we had constructed. We were just shooting rockets at each other, for the most part. I know combat happens around the testing stations, but most of the bulk of my PvP experience ended up being in the Ornithopters, usually getting chased by like 5+ ornithopters, where I'm just in my measly 1 ornithopter trying to maintain the high speed without getting, or forget about the speed hackers that would come by with freaking carrier ornithopters and just steal your ornithopter and then fly it into a pit where their friends would. It's just, dude, they were such a mess. I really hope it's better the next time I come back to the game. So yeah, anyways, I love the idea of no-fly zones in specific reasons to force like ground-focused combat. Sounds great. And then also them adding more layouts with more varieties and challenges to ensure there is clear progression. That's going to happen. Also, they have got improvements to the tech behind the deep desert, they say, which should ideally help make it more stable across the board. Now, I will restate the fact that the thing that I am most interested in is definitely the big update next year when they add the new map, that explorable area of the polar caps with the Water Wars DLC. Once again, that won't be until sometime between April and June of 2026, assuming all goes according to plan and it doesn't get delayed. So yeah, it's still quite a ways out. An entirely new area combined with all the endgame improvements with the Landsrod updates and the additional activity variety of endgame to give us more things to do at max level and max gear. That is going to be huge and certainly is going to warrant another full long playthrough for me. In the meantime, I think I might jump back in this September to check out Chapter 2 and the Lost Harvest DLC. I mean, we got a main story continuation, the new social hub contracts, new deep desert layouts, the new archetype armors, which could mean more gear to farm for different builds, a new vehicle, which, assuming it's a tank, that would be cool to make, new contract chain and unique locations, and dynamic encounters. That is supposed to be coming in September. I don't yet know exactly what that is, but it does have potential just by virtue of being dynamic, right? So I'm curious to see what they do. So yeah, I think I'm going to do a fresh run, probably play for another couple of weeks. Like I'll grind up, go through Haga Basin again, and specifically focus on checking out this new stuff. Why not? We're going to be getting more details in the coming weeks, and when we do, I will be sure to keep you posted. And if I do, in fact, jump back in September, which I'm hoping to, so long as I have the time between any other games we're playing, I will, of course, do an update video for that as well. That is all for today, though. Thank you, as always, for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Take it easy.